Well, hello, lives, and today we have a very special living room in personal presence interview with Donna Foucachon. Donna, welcome.
Thank you. What a treat to have you here. It's not all the teachers who live in Moscow. Glad you could come out to my house.
Well, and it's a beautiful home, so I'm glad I was able to purge my curiosity and get a little glimpse of where you live here in the Palouse, driving through the fields of alfalfa on the way here. You're wonderfully situated.
Oh, it's beautiful here.
Well, Donna Foucachon is one of our French teachers, and her course is actually entitled French 1, The Language and Culture. And so today we were wanting just to really lean into the culture aspect of things. You are not only a knower and a lover of the French language, but your entire life has been Frenchified, intertwined with France. So maybe you could talk a little bit about who you are and how you came to be Donna Foucachon.
I'd love to see how God writes our stories. So do I look at you or at the camera?
Look, you can look at the camera sometimes. Hi, everybody. But yeah, looking at me is probably the most comfortable thing.
Okay. When I was a little girl, when I was a baby, I was born into a Navy family, which made a big impact on my life. First of all, my parents became Christians through a military ministry. But when I was 10 years old, my father got unusual orders for him. He was a carrier pilot, so we were usually moving from port city to port city following the carrier, or one time in Pensacola, Florida, where he was a flight instructor. But when I was 10, he got orders to Paris, France, of all things. It was during the second Berlin air crisis in 1961, after the Bay of Pigs, when we had such a fiasco in Cuba that the Soviets thought we were weak militarily. They told us to get out of Berlin, and they said that they would use, the Americans thought they would use military force. Anyway, my dad went over there to be a part of the group of men who managed that whole affair. So it was such tense times that no dependents were allowed to come. But after a while, things got a little better, and we moved over there as a family. But this is so interesting because things were really tense, because we thought we were on the verge of World War III. No dependents could go. Well, my mother had been a carrier pilot's wife all of their marriage. 2 of her babies were born when my dad was on med cruises. She had already spent so much time apart from him. As this dragged on month after month, she, who was not a Christian at the time, called my father one day from Norfolk, from Quonset Point, Rhode Island to France, and said, "Honey, get us a place to live. I'm selling the house. I'm putting the children on a plane, and we're coming." And my father said, "You can't do that." And she said, and she was a sweet Southern woman. She was not a real strong-willed, aggressive person, but she said, "Honey, I've had enough being apart from you. We're coming."
Wow. Deal with it.
And if you knew her, you would know how out of character that was. But it was very significant in our lives, in my life, also, because we did not have the right to be over there. Therefore, we had no military housing. And my dad just had to get an apartment on what we called on the economy. So we moved into an apartment in a village called Louveciennes, in a Paris suburb where Brigitte Bardot was born, a little town. And because of that, I grew up around French people. Well, I can't say I grew up. We were there for 3.5 years. My stay. My father was there longer because he went before us. But I was 10 years old, and life that surrounded me was French. It was French culture. And I didn't learn about French culture by reading it in books or by going as a tourist, but by living there.
Yeah, during a formative time of your life.
Absolutely. As I was beginning to really understand the world. And I had the American and French experience. In addition, of the 3 children in my family, I was the only one that my parents sent to a French school. So I actually went to a French school during 2 full years, and studied in French.
Yeah.
And had French friends.
And eventually you go back to the States, but surely that experience, led you to make further decisions as an adult that continued this French connection.
It did. I found out that I loved languages. I loved French in particular, and I did well in it. I made my daddy very proud because I got, competing with the French students, I got their coveted prize at the end of the year for the student with the best academic results.
Wow.
So that was fun. And then when we got back to the States, we moved to Winter Park, Florida. I kept studying French in high school and then majored in it in college. Taught it when I finished college. The very first year when I finished, I went back to Winter Park High School and was delighted to get a job as a French teacher there. Then, if you want me to just keep going.
Yeah.
So I took a group of students to France on a travel study program after teaching 1 year. While I was over there, I met up with the parents of some friends from college who were missionaries in France, and spent some time with them in a young life camp that they had in the French Alps. Then I came on back to the States, and about 3 months later got a letter from them saying, hey, we have a young woman who works with us who's got to go back to the States on furlough. Would you consider coming over, since you already speak French, and taking her place just for a year, working with the girls in the clubs, going to the camps, being a counselor? So even though it was just a short-term commitment, it was a huge decision for me, but I prayed about it. My parents prayed about it. I ended up going. Decisions have consequences. Because during that time, during that year, I met my husband, who is French. He's also American now. But we got to know each other. Our hearts were just bound together in a love for Christ and for his church, for the local church. We loved working with youth together in the church. And one time, as we were doing some shopping for a meal, a Christmas party dinner for the church, for the youth group, I just happened to say to him, "J'aime être avec toi. I'd like to be with you." And he said, that opened the door. Anyway, we got married, to make a very long story short, in November of 1978. So this November, it will be 42 years that we've been married.
Well, yeah, I love that, this little glimpse of your interaction. Francis is a very jovial fellow, just a pleasure to be around. And I was thrilled to discover recently that he was a rugby player. Many may not know, but in the south of France, rugby is an absolute passion, especially in the small towns and countryside. So, I felt a little connection there. He's kind of built like a rugby player.
Not like you, though.
No.
You may not be able to tell. Jeffrey's sitting in a couch, but he's a tall man.
Well, I think if we look at the display here, my breadth is also being displayed to full advantage.
What is your nickname?
The Giant.
Joffrey
Yes, it's Joffrey the Giant. Yep. Sean Bonnet says that more women need to speak as eloquently as Mrs. Foucachon. More men need to speak as eloquently as Mrs. Foucachon as well.
Very kind. Thank you.
So Sean Bonnet also has a French-Canadian connection. You might be able to hear it in his name. You guys also have spent some time in French-speaking Canada.
Yes.
Could you tell us a little bit about that? 8 years,
Yes.
And then during some of that time, your kids, you had children at that point.
Yes.
That was difficult to say.
We moved there with 3 children.
Okay.
Daniel was born in France, but we came back to the States. I mentioned Daniel because you know him
Yeah.
so well. Then when we moved to Canada, we had David and Valerie there, but we have 5 children in all. Well, to start out with, I had to relearn French when we went to Quebec. Montreal, not for French Canadians in Montreal, but when we would meet people from the La Provence in the provinces like Saint-Georges-de-Beauce, at first I couldn't understand what they said because the accent is so different. For example, a bench in French is banc, B-A-N-C, and it contains one of the unique sounds in French that we don't have in English, a nasal A-N, banc. But French Canadians say bain, which in French means bath.
Right.
So it can be very confusing. But we lived there 8 years, so after a while.
Yeah, sure, you developed the ear.
I was very at home in Quebecois French. An interesting detail, though, because in some parts of Quebec, the accent is so different, when the Quebecois make movies and they go to France, the French put subtitles on them. Just to make sure everybody's understanding.
Yeah.
You're interested particularly in culture today.
Yes.
We loved Quebec. I don't think that we've ever met a people who party as much as the Quebecois in a wonderful, wholesome way.
Yeah.
It seems like every month of the year there was some kind of fete, some kind of celebration. And of course, the most famous one is probably La Cabane à Sucre, where you go, I guess we say sugaring off in English, where you go to the woods to a log cabin and have a meal where they serve you fresh maple syrup that they've just collected.
Wow.
And it's wonderful. It's often a very hearty breakfast type meal with omelets and baked beans, which they eat with breakfast. And you put maple syrup on everything. Oh, and bacon, good, hearty, wonderful Quebecois bacon. And then in, I guess it would be August, they would have a blé d'Inde party, which is Quebecois for corn on the cob. And they would get these huge vats that they would have just for the occasion and cook just exactly the right amount of time. I think it's, I better not say, can't remember if it was 3 minutes or 10 minutes. Anyway, 10, I guess. Anyway, this huge amount, they get these huge gunny sacks of corn on the cob and put it in. Everyone would bring a salad and you would eat corn on the cob with salads, but not just 1 or 2.
Yeah, you would gorge.
You would just eat corn on the cob.
But even just the technical difficulties of cooking an entire vat, the right amount across the, because you'd imagine that at the bottom or in the middle that they might be overcooked. Go ahead, sorry.
It's so funny because we had it at our house a time I remember, and we had a driveway and we put this big vat there, and it ended up making a huge indentation in our driveway because it was so hot.
Wow. Huh. And so this is just something that in the middle of the city, all the French Canadians are just gathering around and gorging themselves on maple syrup or on corn. It's not just a rural tradition.
Right.
That's amazing. Right. I had no idea.
Right. And then they really do Halloween big. Everyone in the stores dresses up. You just don't find someone not in a costume of some kind. They're just wonderfully welcoming and celebratory people who love to party. And
well, I love that.
I think part of it is related to the weather. It is so cold. I don't know if you know, but I consider myself from Florida because when my dad retired from the Navy, in addition to a previous tour of duty, we lived there. We retired there. So that was quite an adjustment for me to the Quebec weather. In Quebec, we would literally have weeks on end in the middle of winter at minus 30 degrees Fahrenheit.
Oh.
But because the weather is so severe and it gets dark so early in the winter, I think people really need to get together and to have parties to get through.
And to be self-conscious about it. Let's make sure,
get through that difficult winter.
Yeah.
You literally have snow on the ground for 6 months.
Huh.
I mean, significant.
So we
snow.
could suggest a provincial motto like "Party or Die."
Exactly.
Maybe that was a little too brutal there, but yeah, I like that thought that we can, feasting for survival and feasting to thrive. Well, so that's a great bridge, I think, to talking about the cultural aspects of your course. But maybe you could introduce that by telling viewers what we will be studying in French 1, and then how you incorporate the study of culture into that.
Okay. Well, first of all, I love French and I love teaching. I remember when I was still at home with my mother, with my parents, my mother would say, well, if you ever have trouble sleeping, just think of something happy. I think of what I'm going to fix, she said, for the meals tomorrow. That makes me happy, and I go to sleep on that. And I was thinking about that currently, if I'm having trouble going to sleep, I'll remember that my mother said, think of something happy. I meditate on scripture, but also when I just want to think happy thoughts, I think of how I could teach things better in French. That makes me happy.
Yeah, okay, great. So students can, at the very least, expect a happy teacher.
That's right. I love French and I love explaining French. I start out with teaching the most difficult sounds for Americans to make in French, because I feel like if you get over that, then everything else is easy as far as pronunciation, and French is so very different pronunciation-wise from English. So I start out with teaching the most difficult sounds, and I remember one time as I was doing that with a woman I was tutoring, she said she just couldn't get the French R, and she said, Donna, I've had orthodontic work and my jaws have been off, and I've had to have her teeth connected together. She said, I think maybe I just structurally can't do it. And she had such a hard time, and I thought I usually had pretty good success in helping people learn how to make French sounds. I said to myself, maybe this is different for my friend. But she ended up being able to do it beautifully. And I think you need somebody who can guide you through that.
Yeah, absolutely.
You need somebody for the French R to say, there's no way you can make a French R unless you know how to gargle. There's no way you can make a French R if you stop thinking of making it out here, unless you stop thinking of making it out here near the front of your mouth, and think of the position where you should make it, where a G or a K is formed,
right,
and then gather some spit, and then push it forward. And
I think
can get it.
All language teachers kind of experience those moments when they're helping with pronunciation, where the student has never considered how they make the sounds they make in the first place. Much less a sound in another language. But there's the technical help that you can give in learning and teaching someone how to make a sound. But then it's also language teachers understand it's not automatic. Like, we know that just because we told you to trill your tongue, that you're not going to be able to do it tomorrow.
Right. It takes practice.
Yes. Yeah, sure does. Well, let me tell you. I want you to keep going, but you talked a little earlier about the nasal sound.
Yes.
In Portuguese, which is the language I teach, we have a little A with a tilde on it, which says And that's something that English speakers absolutely just pull their hair out over for a while until it comes together beautifully. But every once in a while you'll say a word with that sound in it to an English speaking student, and they'll just get it first time, and then it's like, wow, what a wonderful thing. Yeah.
I tell my students, don't even try to make the nasal sounds until you put yourself in the mindset of having a bad head cold. Just pretend you're really congested.
I thought you wanted happy thoughts. It's like, I'm going to think of happy thoughts, but you guys need to think of head colds.
Then, though, you can, if you're thinking here, you can say, oh.
Yes.
Oh. So little things like that.
Yeah. Well, you're not just studying pronunciation, of course. You're going to be embarking on some some fundamental grammar, on some sentences and conversations. What does that part of the class look like?
Well, before I get to that, could I add something?
Yes.
So something I do that I haven't seen done elsewhere before is I use what I used with my own children when we were working on French. There's a little book called La Méthode Boucher that was the book France used in the 1920s to teach first graders to read. And so before my students can even understand very many words at all, I teach them to read by phonics in French. I'm teaching my grandchildren right now, and it's amazing to see that they can read well beyond their comprehension.
Yes.
Because it's just like teaching an American child to read English by phonics. So I tell my students, you'll be able to decode sentences in a newspaper even if you can't understand it. So I teach them to decode just to get.
It's a valuable skill, actually. You know, just being able to read out loud and just kind of immerse yourself in a text. I think often students look at that and say, well, I don't understand this, or I can get the gist, but nothing else. What's the value of it to me? You know, trust your teachers. There's value in it for you.
So then, of course, we tackle vocabulary and grammar. A lot of people talk about immersion. Obviously, immersion is the ideal way to learn, but it isn't possible if you're an adult, if you're not living in the country.
Right.
It's possible for a baby to learn a language by immersion, or for an adult to learn it if they're in the country. When I first started teaching, when I taught at Winter Park High School, I walked into the school book depository, and there were just mountains, piles of French books that they were sending to the garbage, that they were sending to the dump to throw away, because it was the ALM, the audiolingual method, they called it. That was just what they called this. But it was a method that tried to bring immersion to the classroom without doing any grammar teaching. So, and it was a disaster. They threw them away because after a short time, they saw students just weren't learning. So what I believe is important is to give a skeletal structure of grammar to the student that he can hang vocabulary and conversation on. So I start out right away with grammar, but also I try to bring some immersion elements in, because immersion is wonderful. So I have videos that I get from Annenberg Learner on the internet. They're free for K through 12 educators. And I am going to be asking my students to listen to them. That'll be part of homework. They'll definitely be learning French, but it will go beyond what they'll be able to absorb and learn, but it would just be constantly exposing them to that. So obviously the grammar, I mean, just all the basic typical things. Yeah.
Any songs? I still remember. So in seventh grade, I studied French in Canada, and I still remember a couple of the songs. Are you doing any music?
Oh, yes.
Of course.
A few easy songs. Yes.
But your son Daniel is up to some shenanigans here in chat. And so
I do have a very important element I need to tell you.
The stream is yours. So you should not. Yes. What do you have for me?
So in recitations, I will be having a guest appearance most of the time weekly on Friday. I'm teaching.
Okay, I want you to save that.
Oh,
okay, that's like the pièce de résistance.
Yes.
Okay, so all right. So I said that. You know, and we can definitely talk about my French pronunciation. So Dan, thank you. So the other day I had opportunity to say something in French. I think it was a name, and you know, I said it in a way where my first goal was to be intelligible to an American, and I don't have wonderful French pronunciation, but that was my first goal. Daniel was all over me. Daniel is a stickler for perfect French pronunciation, which I absolutely love about him. So in the spirit of that, he has presented us with a tongue twister. Okay. And so I wonder if you could coach me through it.
All right.
Yeah, he challenges us. So I think really me and the viewers to say the following 3 times fast. So I'm going to just say it slowly, and maybe you can kind of help me out.
Okay.
Okay. La roue sur la roue roule. La roue sur la roue roule.
La roue
La roue
sur la roue.
sur la roue.
Oh, la roue sur la rue.
Yes,
Are
that's
you
right.
ready?
La roue sur la rue.
La roue sur la rue roule.
Oh, I'm gonna have trouble with the who and the who.
That's one of the sounds I teach the first
I'm
day.
sure. I'm sure you do.
Would you like a tip?
Yes, of course I would.
Okay, say a real strong E.
E.
Now, leave everything inside your mouth the same, but move your lips forward.
Okay.
E, U.
E. U.
You got it.
Who.
It's a very delicate sound on the tip of your
It's the
lips.
delicateness of French that gives me trouble. I'm not a delicate person. All right. So E. Who. E.
Oh, E.
Who.
U. Just doing the U. E. U.
E.
U.
U.
E.
U.
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 Oh man, I can hear the difference. Is it? I wonder what I'm lacking. All right.
Practice.
All right. I'm going to try to say the whole thing so we don't spend too much time on this. And I'm just going to truck right through it. And then you and Daniel will have to forgive me. La roue sur la roue roule. La roue sur la roue roule. La roue sur la roue roule.
Yay.
You're being kind, but that's a key aspect of being a language teacher, saying good job even when you could pick it apart at 5 or 6 different points. Thank you.
Well, I'll never forget when I had a frozen shoulder and went to physical therapy. The physical therapist told me, it was in France, he said, this is going to take des pas de fourmi. It's going to take ant, A-N-T, ant steps, baby steps. And that's how it is with French. You just have to every day over and over practice, and you make little increments of progress, little baby steps of progress. And then all of a sudden one day you realize that shoulder doesn't hurt as much, and I'm speaking better.
Well, as a language teacher, that's one of the things I love doing. You've spent enough time that you give the students a project that's a little different from whatever you've been going through. And the whole reason I might present a project like that is so that when they're done, I can say, now think back to what you learned, where you were at the beginning of class. Look what you just did. And they usually don't realize they were capable of that until that moment. And I think that's a big moment in the life of a particular beginning language student. Like, look how far I've come.
Yes.
Well, let's talk about. So we were leading into culture and the inclusion of French culture in your class, and we're going to talk about a guest star in your program, I believe.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
My husband, Francis Lucien David Foucachon. So he obviously is a native speaker, and he will also not only be helping with the cultural aspect, but he will be helping with recitations on Friday. So that's the final, not the final, but that's one of the final elements of the course. We'll be having dialogues each week. I want to follow kind of a natural progression of experiences that you would have when you go to France for the first time. What kind of situations do you find yourselves in? What kind of vocabulary do you need? Obviously, starting with greetings and directions and restaurant language and doctor and family vocabulary.
Yeah.
Simple dialogues built around a progression of situations, dialogues that the students will memorize and then repeat with me and my husband. And as we go along and there's more vocabulary that the students learn, there'll be conversation in the Friday recitations with him.
With none other than,
with
yes.
none other than, which he's so kind to come and to help me with that.
Yeah, well, that's a wonderful thing. And Francis is a trained chef.
Yes,
and I
he
believe that every
is.
once in a while you guys will be kind of bringing that element of things into the recitations.
And vocabulary built around that situation too, which is an important part of French vocabulary. So yes, my husband was trained in a Michelin-starred restaurant in France with La Mère Léa, one of the legendary French mothers of French cuisine. When we moved to Idaho, we had been with Mission to the World at the PCA for many years, but when we decided to stay here overnight, when he took a leave of absence, of course, that support stopped, and he needed to support our family, and he started a high-end gourmet restaurant called West of Paris. We live in Idaho, so it was very appropriately named. We were definitely west.
Pretty far west, yeah.
He and by the way, I had known of his past, but I didn't know what was in it until we started that restaurant, and I was absolutely amazed.
You fell in love all over again.
I did.
I can picture it.
I did. Anyway, he has, and as part of our restaurant, he would give cooking lessons here. That was one of the reasons we bought this house, because it was conducive to doing that. So he's used to giving cooking lessons, and he is going to take us into our kitchen.
Wonderful.
And that's just occasionally, but
yes.
I said, honey, what kinds of things will you do? He said he'll teach us crêpes.
Okay.
Crepes.
Yeah.
Creepies is what Americans said to me. I said, no. Crepes and some amazing winter soups, and there's just any number of things. What was another thing he was talking about? I'm going to try to get him to do a quick version of stocks, because they are at the heart of all sauces in France.
Well, let me ask a question that some parents might think of as they hear about this delightful aspect for your class. Is this going to complicate my student's life? Like, am I going to have to buy a kitchen to take this class?
No.
What's the structure of it going to look like?
Oh, well, I was assuming I've never had the opportunity to have a cooking component in a class, and I was assuming they would just watch, but actually they could go into the kitchen and do it at the same time.
I mean, that's possible.
Either one. I hadn't even thought of that.
You could have a bunch of burnt crepes on your hand. Like, not so much batter, Susie.
So Joffrey, there were two other components to the course. Learning a language is learning about a people,
yes,
and therefore about their land, their history. So I'm just going to give a nugget each time on French history. When I've taught this before, I've actually gotten what we used to call cash register tape, credit card processing machine tape, and just have them make a timeline with just just to take them from creation to current day France, but just the highlights of it, so they know where France has come from and where it's going, and also give a nugget of French geography. And this course, just because the Francophone world is so vast, I felt like I needed to focus just on one aspect of it. So it's focused on France. You could extend this amazingly, but the geography, therefore, of France, the rivers of France, the mountains of France, the cities of France, the regions of France, the climate of France, just a nugget each time.
Yeah, well, I think that's wonderful, because you're integrating, a language is not just some abstract thing to be learned. As you mentioned, it's part of a people and of peoples. And so you're integrating all these things, but then, as the family and as the students in your course, how valuable is it to have a language course that is integrating all these other forms of knowledge that you can integrate into the rest of your education? You're studying Western Civ, knowing that where Paris is within the Western European mass, knowing where Normandy is, knowing where Provence is, knowing why the English might have been interested in, the parts of France that they were interested in. knowing who's on the eastern border of France, which I think a lot of American students might actually struggle to produce that information. That's all integral to the study of European history and to the history of Christendom. So I just love how, it's just across Kepler, but I love how this class is a part of that, where there's all this knowledge that's going to be brought in that is integral and integrated.
Though I'll concentrate on France, there are over 300 million people in the world who speak French.
Yes.
The number of countries where French is spoken is vast.
And you're actually involved, you and your husband are involved in a ministry to French speakers around the globe.
Yes.
Could you just give us a little introduction to that?
Oh, yes. It's called Huguenot Heritage. We work in partnership with Third Millennium Ministries, founded by Richard Pratt, Dr. Richard Pratt, who was, I think, one of the most beloved professors at Reformed Theological Seminary in Orlando. Francis had him and just loved every class he had with him. They have produced History Channel quality videos of seminary courses, and we are responsible for getting them into French and doing the video production of them. The motto of Third Millennium is for the biblical education for the world for free. The motto of Huguenot Heritage is une formation biblique entièrement gratuite pour la francophonie, which is biblical education for the French-speaking world for free.
Yes.
So the courses are amazing. I'm very involved with that too, on the production side, and I work with them in detail, and every time I finish, I just think, oh, I wish I had been able to listen to this course and know this information.
Yeah.
30, 40 years ago. This is so rich, and it makes me understand the Bible and the world and my place in it so much better. They're all available at heritagehuguenot.fr or HuguenotHeritage.com or thirdmill.org in English.
Yes, and I first became familiar with thirdmill.org 15, 20 years ago, because they have materials in so many languages. But I love that you guys are participating in this Huguenot Heritage and the production of all this French language stuff. Now, I don't mean to put you on the spot with this, but just out of curiosity, do you guys produce different versions for, say, an African Francophone audience as opposed to a European, or do you have Quebecois French versions? Like, how does that work for you guys? I know that that's just adding work upon work, but just curious.
Well, there is what is considered to be standard French for the world internationally, and it is considered to be French from France. And amazingly, when Dobson, way back, was translating films into French, they did research and they said, of the standard French, Lyon French is the standard of the standard. So Francis is from Lyon, but anyone in any French-speaking country can understand French. So no, we do them just in standard French.
Okay.
On purpose.
Yeah, great.
Because now not everyone could understand Haitian French,
right?
Or from some African countries, but everyone from these other countries can understand French. And Africa usually looks to Europe for scholarship anyway, so that plays in well.
Yeah. Well, very cool. Well, as we approach the end of the stream, guys, this is an opportunity for you all to enter with more questions or comments. But I wonder if I could impose upon you for a soundbite moment where you might look at the camera and just for a few seconds tell students why they should take your course.
You should take this course because if you start learning French, you will be starting on a lifelong adventure. And I would exhort you to not be a dilettante. A dilettante, according to the dictionary, is someone who dabbles in an art. Don't start French with the idea of, oh, I'm going to do a little French, I'm going to dabble in this. Start with the goal of learning to speak it fluently. You can. That is a very realistic goal. Of course, you're not going to learn to do it in 1 year of French, but start with the goal of, I'm going to start now and I am never going to stop studying French. I'm going to study it until I can speak it fluently. We've hardly even talked about French culture, but
Yeah.
there's a whole world to discover through French and through the French people. I've been enriched so much by their culture. They have a concept of time that is beautiful. We Americans are so productivity, profitability oriented, and the French are not in the same way we are. La joie de vivre is what's most important to them. Learning to smell the roses along life's pathway, learning to have quiet space in your life so you can see beauty that you can't see if you don't stop and take time. And they value time for meals. That's a huge thing. Meals structure their day. They value time for meals. They value time for relationships.
And the language is a portal to all of that.
It is.
I don't know how I could just want to, with such an enthusiastic teacher, I think just dipping one's toe in the water is not really going to be an option. I think if people end up signing for your class, they're going to get dragged all the way into the pool. So you might as well just dive in.
French is so beautiful. It's like sitting down to a concert when you sit down we watch the French news on the computer, and I feel like, now I'm going to sit down and listen to a concert. It's a language based on vowels, so it's just smooth and even and silky and just beautiful.
Oh, wonderful.
For the ear.
Well, really appreciate everyone's participation. Francis is watching, and he says, French will be the language of heaven.
Oh, there we go.
I'm hearing Danielle's voice in there as well. Yeah, so the whole Foucachon family just joyously Francophilic, I guess is what we could say. And Donna Foucachon offering French 1, the language and culture of France, next semester. We're really looking forward to the term and glad you're on board. Thank you for taking the time to do this.
Thank you for coming here. This was fun.
Yeah, good. Awesome. Thanks, everybody. So long. See you for the next live.